Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Piyush and this is day 19 in the series 28 days of easy Terraform. In this video, we'll be looking into provisioners, like we'll be looking into local provisioners, remote provisioners, file provisioners, why do we use it, and of course we'll be doing that with the help of a demo. I'll leave the task for you in the GitHub repository so that you can practice yourself, and I will provide the rest of the code as well. So the comments and like target of this video is gonna be 150 likes and 100 comments. I'm sure you can do that. So without any further ado, let's get into the video. So let's try to understand what exactly are the provisioners. Like you might have heard this before if you have worked with Terraform, or you might have read it somewhere, like what are these. So okay, so let's try to understand what exactly are these provisioners. So you might have heard these before, or if you have worked with Terraform, you have already worked with it. So let's see if you get to learn anything new if you have already worked with it. So there are basically these type of provisioners. We have local, remote, file, and third-party provisioners. Okay, so these provisioners perform some actions on the resources before they are created or after they are created. So mostly the post creation actions. For these purpose we use it. Now let's assume um, for local provisioner, when do we use it? When we have to run some arbitrary inline commands on the machine where your Terraform is installed. For example, like till now we have been using a local machine to execute Terraform scripts, and let's say we have to create a file with the timestamp. Okay, that says okay, deployment started at this time and at the end deployment ended at this time. So we want a file to be created that will keep a log of the timestamp when the deployment was started and when it was ended. So for those purpose, we use something called as a local provisioner. The remote provisioner, what it will do, it will run a script or a command on the remote machine itself, on the remote resource. That remote resource could be a remote virtual machine or virtual machine scale set or Azure web app and so on. So any remote resource that is not local in our machine. Okay, we use remote executor for that. Now for remote executor we need few things, like for the local executor we only need command is the mandatory field, and rest there are some optional fields. But for remote executor we need connection, because we'll be executing these commands or script remotely over a machine or remotely over a resource. So we need to have some sort of connection string, connection credentials to that. Let's say if the remote resource is a virtual machine, so if it's a Ubuntu or like Linux based machine, we need username, or we need the private key of the machine, we need the public IP. So basically we need to establish an SSH connection. If it's a Windows machine, we need to establish an RDP connection. Okay, so for that we need the connection and its related parameters. And then we also need either some inline commands that we want to execute remotely on that resource, or we need a script that will be executing on that. For example, let's say you have provisioned your infrastructure. Now the next step is to deploy the code. Let's say you have provisioned a AKS cluster. Now the next step is git clone. So for git clone, you will create a null resource or a Terraform data resource, and inside that you will create a remote provisioner that will do the git cloning for you. Similarly, you can run the kubectl apply command remotely over to that server. So that's just some examples. Then we have file provisioner. File provisioner, what it will do, it will copy or create files to the remote directory. Okay, so let's say you have some files that you want to copy from your local repository to the remote resource. So you do that with the help of a file provisioner. So in this as well, you need connection string, obviously, because we are doing sort of SCP to that remote resource. So you need that. Now you need source and destination as well. Source, like which file needs to be copied, and destination is where it should be copied in the remote resource. Instead of source, like instead of the file name, you can provide the content as well. That's like these, you have to provide either of these things, but destination and connection are mandatory fields. There are some third-party provisioners as well, but Terraform does not recommend you to use it, or like not Terraform, HashiCorp does not recommend you to use it. In fact, as per HashiCorp, you should not be using provisioners if there is any other option available, and provisioners should be used as a last resort. It could create a lot of complexity, it could slow down your infrastructure provisioning, it could involve some security risks, and there are some other issues, right? So that's why it should be your last resort. Like, what other alternatives do we have? Okay, let's see. Let's say you have to run some post deployment actions, right, such as git clone or kubectl apply. So instead of doing that with the help of this remote command, you can use the cloud init script or user data scripts, right? I mean, it's not applicable to Kubernetes resource. It's mostly for the virtual machines. But for Kubernetes resource, there are like Kubernetes provider that you can use, and then it has a resource type which is called Kubernetes manifest. For virtual machine, you can use cloud init. In case of Google Cloud, for AWS, we have user data. For Azure, I guess for Azure as well, I guess it's called cloud init or something like that. Yeah, it's mostly the metadata that you use. I guess it's called cloud init. So these are the alternatives that we have available, right? Instead of local command, you can use a null resource or Terraform data resource, right? But there are some cases where, let's say, you have to perform some action and it is not supported by cloud init, or it is not supported by user data, or there is no provider that can help you run that particular command or run that particular action. So for those cases, when there is no other option, then only you use provisioners. Okay, so let's see what we are doing in this video. So these are all the tasks that we'll be performing. So first we'll be provisioning VM and its associated resources. What do we mean by associated resources? That means a resource group. That means a virtual network, subnet, public IP. Will have a network security group, public IP to network interface, association, network interface, and so on, right? And virtual machine, of course. So these, like, this is what we have done dozens of time in previous videos. So I'll be starting from here. Like, I will not be showing you how do we create these resources, because this we have already done multiple times, but I'll show you how we can do the rest of the steps. The rest is like, these are all the examples of all the provisioners that we have. So before the VM is provisioned, we need to create a file with the timestamp. Okay, for example, deployment -timestamp.log. So something like, the deployment has been started at this point, and we'll create a sample file for that. So that's you might have already guessed it already, but that's a sort of local provisioner, right? Because it is not actually creating the resource, it is not actually remotely creating anything or remotely executing anything. It is doing that locally on the machine where Terraform is installed. So this is a local provisioner. Then after the virtual machine is provisioned, we need to install and start nginx. Like, if you have worked with cloud before, these sort of steps we usually do with the user data script or cloud init and so on. But because we are doing a demo of provisioner, so we will be doing that with the help of a remote-exec provisioner. Okay, so a remote provisioner. Now the next is we'll be copying the code to VM's home directory. So over here we'll be using a file provisioner. Okay, and then there is another step which says create another file for deployment with the completion timestamp. Just now we have created one file with the starting time of deployment, another file for the completion timestamp. So this task I will leave it for you to do. Okay, rest I will perform, and this is pretty similar to this task, so you can execute it by yourself. Okay, all right, so let's dig in. Let's try to see how we can do that. I'll just keep this aside for now. Okay, so here's my sample file. I am in my day 19 folder. Okay, and it has, as always, it has a resource group. Okay, then it has a virtual network. We have created a virtual network with this address space, and then we've created an Azure RM subnet with the subnetwork of that virtual network. Then we have created a network security group to allow first SSH access to the VM on port 22, and also inbound HTTP access, because we'll be installing nginx. So to test it, we need to be able to access the application over port 80. So that's why we have enabled these two security rules. Then we have created a public IP, because obviously we'll be accessing this application over the internet. So a public IP, and then a network interface, and then we have done the network interface to the public IP association. So these are pretty standard steps that we have performed a lot of times, right? Then here is the virtual machine that we have created, and it will be using username as this, and it will be using your SSH keys, your default SSH key in the SSH directory. Okay, and then there is an output variable with the VM's public IP address. Okay, so this is the canvas that we have in which we'll be working on. We'll not be starting with a blank canvas. So this is where we'll be working on. So now if you remember like what we were doing earlier, so we were actually, the task that we had, first task is to, before VM, create a file with the timestamp. Okay, so let's dig into that. Let's go to before virtual machine. Okay, let's create a null resource over here. Okay, so I'm gonna do resource, null resource. Null resource is a type of resource which actually don't have a resource type, right? Like we are performing some actions in this particular resource block, but we are not actually provisioning a resource. So there is one more of this type. It is called Terraform underscore data. So this is similar to that null resource. Okay, let's give it a name. Let's call it deployment prep. Okay, we are just doing the deployment preparation. And then we also have to provide the trigger when this null resource will be created. Like we just provide that. So for that we'll do triggers. Okay, now we want this to be executed. When do we want this to be executed? We are executing before the virtual machine, so we want this to be executed always. Okay, so for always we just use trigger as always run equal to timestamp. This is how we make sure that it executes every time. And then we have to provide the provisioner. So now the action that we have to perform. Okay, so provisioner starts with provisioner keyword, and then the type of provisioner, local, remote, or file. So over here we'll be provisioning a local executor or local exec provisioner, and the value should be your command. Okay, command, as I've told you, it's the mandatory field. So what command will be executing? Will be executing echo. Okay, and deployment started at question mark and then timestamp, because this is how we do string interpolation in Terraform. Deployment started at this, and then we'll redirect the same to a file, and timestamp is a function actually, and then we'll redirect this to a file. I'm sure it is visible. Yeah, it is visible. Okay, so the file name is deployment hyphen and the same thing, question mark, and then timestamp, which is a function. Okay, dot log. I think it's okay. Okay, no, question mark should be over here. Oh, sorry. The curly brackets should be over here. Okay, so that's the command that it will execute. Now this is the local exec provisioner. This is the first part of the task that we were about to perform. Okay, I'll execute it all at once, um, because otherwise you'll get confused. Okay, so now we need to also make sure that this local exec, it has to be executed before the VM, right? So that means inside the VM over here, we need to add a depends on. Okay, we need to create a dependency on that resource. Which resource? Null resource. Okay, so for that we'll do depends on over here, and then we'll provide null resource dot deployment prep. Okay, simple. Now the next part of it is post deployment action. Post deployment action, we have to install nginx, install it, enable it, and make sure that we have a sample application. So after the VM is created, let's go over here. After the VM is created, let's create a null resource for, actually we don't need to create a null resource. Maybe we can do that within the same resource, right? Because it's part of the virtual machine. Once all the steps have been performed till here, then it can perform that action, right? So over here, we can just specify provisioner, and type is, now this time it has to be remote exec, because we'll be executing those actions remotely. Okay, now as I've told you before, it should have connection details, it should have the commands as well. Okay, so for that, let's write the commands first. Inline, and inline over here we'll write the command. So I'll just copy it. Okay, I'll just copy the commands to install and start nginx. Okay, so here it is. What are we doing? Let's remove that part. Okay, we are doing sudo apt-get update, sudo apt-get install -y nginx, and then we are also doing an echo. So we are just creating a simplest HTML file, and we are writing the content to where www.html index.html, which is the default directory for nginx. It will serve the web page from there. And then we are doing a systemctl start nginx and enable, so that it can survive the reboot of the virtual machine. Okay, so that's the inline for remote exec. Now we have to provide the connection details. Okay, so for connection details, after this we can add connection. Okay, now it should have username, it should have password, it should have password or key, right? So let's provide the connection type. Type should be, let's say, SSH. Okay, and then user is Azure VM. I guess that's the default user, or Azure user. So Azure user, I guess. Yeah. And then we have private key. Private key is basically a file that resides in the home directory and inside SSH folder, and the file name is IDRSA. Okay, so that's the private key. Then we have host, like where are we establishing that connection? So host should be your public IP of the VM. So Azure RM public IP.vm.ip. Okay, that's the connection details. Now this part is done. Now we have executed the remote commands as well. Now the next part, which is we have to copy the files, right? So we can have multiple provisioners within the same resource. So let's create another provisioner. So let's see where it is ending. Okay, so this was it. So let's create another provisioner, another local file provisioner. Not local file provisioner. Okay, so for file as well, we need to have connection details. So I'll just copy it from from the above, and let's copy it first. So now this will help us establish the SCP connection, and then we also have to copy the files. So source, which file. So I have created a sample file over here, so let's use that config directory, and inside that there is a file called what's the file name, let's see, sample.conf. Okay, and then the destination is, let's say, /home/Azure user, and inside that the same sample.conf. Okay, now we have let's see if I missed anything. Provisioner file destination, yeah. Okay, so we have created the provisioner SSH. Okay, and then this is your VM's public IP. Now let's go back and see if we have completed all the steps. So we have provision VM and associated resources, that's good. Then before VM we have created a file with timestamp, that we did. After VM install and start nginx, that we did. Copy the code to VM's home directory, and that's what we are doing with the help of file provisioner. So local, remote, and file, we have used all three provisioners, and this one I'll leave it to you, so you can do that by yourself. Okay, looks like it's been completed. Earlier I made a mistake, by the way. Over here I forgot to add the IP address, so I added that and I ran it again and it was successful. Now let's see. So we have our deployment file created, that means our local provisioner was executed. Now we need to check the remote executor, in which we have installed nginx, and we have served a web page, right? So for that, let's take the public IP of this page and let's go to our web browser. Over here, let's see if it is accessible. Oops. Where is our output variable? VM public IP, which should be Azure RM public IP, VM IP address. We have used the same. Okay, and everything, it says provisioning with file, remote executor, enable nginx, and here is the file as well. It looks like it should be up, and we have also added the NSG rule for port 80. Let's check our VM. This was provisioner demo. Okay, we have all the resources over here, and we have demo VM. So looks like VM is running, and it has a public IP as well. Let's see the network security groups, application security group. No, we have not created this. Let's go to network security group over here, VM NSG. How do we check the properties of it? IP configuration. This is also good. How about public IP? Let's see if we find anything in activity logs. Yeah, it looks okay. Okay, let's try to do the SSH into this VM first. So SSH Azure user @public IP, and it should take the default SSH keys. Okay, I'm logged in. So over here, home Azure user, we have sample.conf. So that means the file executor also worked, file provisioner also worked. Now we need to check our nginx. Okay, nginx should be in var www html. index.html is there. Okay, and let's see the content of it. index.html, yeah, it's there. Now we need to check if nginx itself is running or not. So sudo systemctl status nginx. Okay, nginx is also running. Now this is strange. Let's see. Oh, nginx.service failed to parse PID from file where nginx PID invalid argument. Is that an error or just a warning message? I'm not sure. The process says it is running. What happened to it then? Okay, let's verify if we have everything. So this worked. This is fine. Now we are only concerned with this. Azure RM public IP VM IP address SSH connection Azure's user. Yes, and the file was IDRSA private key. What we did, we basically start nginx and enable nginx, created this. These all step look fine. Remote executor with this connection, yeah, this is fine. And disable password authentication. Yeah, these all look good to me. Public IP address. Okay, this is public IP address IT. Did we create the association over here? Yes. NSGID. Okay, let's see the network security group rules. Port 80 allowed and port 22 allowed. VM NSG rule was there, we just saw, but we did not see the rules. We saw the network security group was there. Okay, it was from the network interface, network security group. How do we check the rules? Okay, IP configuration, that's your demo public IP. Associated, that's cool. Let's see if we are able to curl locally. If we can do curl localhost, yeah, this is working. That means our nginx is up. Oh no, it doesn't say that. What if we run it from here? Curl on this. Yeah, this is also working. So what happened from the browser? Is it because, yeah, oh okay, it was by default redirecting to HTTPS, so that's why it was not working. Changing it to HTTP, it worked. Now we can see that our text is here, nginx is working. So now we have tested all three provisioners, we have checked the demo, and there's a task for you, by the way, which we have already discussed. I'll leave the details in the GitHub repository for you to action further, and everything else as well. So thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you learned provisioners today. And in the next video, considering you complete the comments and like target, once you do that, I'll unlock the next video in which we'll be doing an amazing project. It's not gonna be a mini project, it will be a slightly bigger project, so you can call it an intermediate level project, where we'll be um, provisioning AKS cluster along with Azure Key Vault, along with Service Principal, with the help of custom modules. So we'll be creating custom modules. We'll be looking into what are the modules in Terraform. And it is really important to understand modules because of so many reasons, and it is one of the industry best practice as well. So do not skip that. Do not skip any of the video in this series. I have done a lot of hard work to make it available free of cost. So yeah, thank you so much and happy learning. Have a good day. I will see you soon. Bye.